Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's Partner Web Conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Tech Talk. Today's topic, Community-Driven Engineering. My name is Janice and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in the meeting today indicates your consent to being included in the recording meeting. Attendees may access the web conference recording via the same registration link that was used to attend today's live broadcast. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, you can turn on the Q&A panel by selecting the question mark icon located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We do have presenters standing by to respond to your questions throughout the session. Now, on to the presentation. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Principal Program Manager Frank Dahl. So without any further delay, Frank, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you for attending this talk. With me, I have one of my colleagues, Laurent Ricky. He's sitting by helping out on questions, so he will be available also as in another role. Later in this talk, we are going to be doing a demo, and Laurent will actually be the back-end engineer at Microsoft, working with us as we go through the demo. So about this talk, objectives of this, what you should expect here is getting an introduction to the community-driven engineering, all from knowing when you would be considering to use the community-driven engineering, because you can use this as an alternative to other established channels we have. I'll be going through on how you need to be going through a sign-up process to onboard the program, and also the steps for how you prime your development environments to use the program. And to make it all very tangible for you, we will be going through a process, a demo, at which that we'll create a request from start to completion, so you get also to become familiar with the flow of creating requests. Obviously, with this talk, we are not talking about specifics on doing development per se. So understanding there is obviously considered that you are familiar in that space. There are, in some instances, need for actually developing ATL tests for certain type of requests, and we're not going to cover this. I know there's other tech talks made available on that, so I recommend that you go have a look at those. So with that introduction to CDE, what are we really hoping to achieve with the community-driven engineering? Well, if we take a look back, before we had one version, customizations could be done using overlayered code. You had the flexibility in doing changes to the standard application code, and that has changed with the one version where changes to the standard application can only be done through extensions. And so you cannot do this anymore, right? Well, this is where the community-driven engineering comes in. What we're looking for is to help empower developers to be able to still be influencing the standard application code. What we are enabling is that developers are able to suggest changes to the standard application code by actually changing the code directly and sending this to us for review, such that we, with that as a basis, can be integrating and changing the standard application. Consider this an alternative to otherwise that you would be creating service requests, extensibility support requests, or even if you have like a feature that you would like to see happen, where you otherwise would have just waited and hoped for this by logging it on the ideas portal. Getting to use this is open for customers, partners, and ISV developers in general. I'll go through how to onboard this, but the program is open for all developers. Furthermore, to use the CDE, you're actually able to use your existing development boxes, whether they are hosted on Azure or local VMs. It doesn't matter, both are supported. And so we'll go through on how you prime these environments also. Think of this as a way that you can be interacting with the standard application, bring it to our attention, and with the monthly updates, we can then quickly get to a turnaround time where you're able to drive changes into the standard application. Why would you use the community-driven engineering? Well, think along the lines of that developers used to be able to make changes directly in the application. And sometimes you run across some small things that just stick out. Well, this small change here just needs to be changed. And you have it right in front of you. Developers would typically then have it at hand and they're thinking in the context of the code in many cases. And so it's easier to influence this from the code itself rather than needing to for instance, create a service request, articulate what the scenario is, explain how to repro this, with all that context that may not always be necessary to drive a change if it's something obvious. So communicating on the base of the code directly is another way of articulating how and what you need to be changing. It also helps your engineers in having less of a cost in articulating this and communicating this to us for the same reason. Getting familiar to use the CDE is actually convenient in that we are using standardized development tools. It involves using Azure DevOps, which I presume many of you are familiar with already. We will be making a Git repository available, and so both of those are tools that I presume many in the development community would be familiar with already. The appeal here is also that as you're communicating this directly on code changes and submitting onwards to us, we can quickly get to a state where we are looking at the code, we are reviewing the code, we are getting to a conclusion on, sure, these code changes are good and sound to take, and we can continue processing of the change. In a sense, you are kind of working closely with us as engineers, similar to as if you are an extended model 2 or engineering teams here. In fact, when you are making changes to the application and proposing them by submitting to us, it actually kicks off a review process where engineers at our core application teams will be engaging directly, assessing what you're trying to change, provide feedback, and if everything is good, agree on the change and process the fix onwards. So this is likely the fastest way by which you can bring code into the application using the CDE as an option. And ask in that regard is that we had been a little bit uneven, uncertain about now with the overlayering where you cannot do that anymore, and you're looking at only doing extensions that in the past you may have been doing some small fixes with customers because, well, it was easy to do and convenient, you could quickly have it over and done with. And so the fear might be that in this new environment where you can only influence by extensions, that some fixes might not otherwise have been done. We are hoping that the CDE program would make it seamless for engineers to drive changes, and so that we encourage you to, if you run across small fixes, then use the CDE as an option. Consider using that to drive that feedback back to us so we get those even small fixes fixed in the product and help improve the quality together. The program is open for logging bug fixes. You can also be using it for extensibility requests or even small feature donations. Let's have a look at how you would be considering using CDE in each one of these instances. Let's take bugs. Bugs obviously can be filed to us using service requests. That's the established channel, if you like. And sure enough, if you're finding a bug and you're not quite sure about what is really the change that needs to be happening and you're not really comfortable in trying out fixing that yourself, okay, still go with the service request by all means. If, on the other hand, it's obvious to you what needs to be changed, you may actually have the line of code in front of you where you see here's the bug, and you can communicate that seamlessly by pointing to that fix. Then do consider CDE as an alternative of bringing that fix in. It is probably going to be more seamless for you doing it in this way as opposed to going the route on the service request. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we are probably having the option of getting the fix in the product faster by utilizing the CDE program. Regarding extensibility, we have the model for that you can log extensibility support requests, and we are processing those in a way where we are assessing what are you needing to do as a customization. We have certain patterns or way that we commonly are addressing these, and you may have become familiar with this from experience in seeing us making a few of these over the course of time. And so if you have come to a level where you feel, okay, I could probably do this myself, then again here it's worth considering if you'd rather want to yourself suggest the code changes to be done in order to enable your customization. And it could even help then in a way that it influences how the approach that we'll take for fixing this, because you are making a proposal for a certain way, and if it's within the scope of the options that we find are good and sound patterns to go by, then you'd likely be able to see us taking an approach that is maybe even more convenient than otherwise it would have been for if we have done it just from a request log. Then there's also features. If you're looking for a new feature, or customers looking for a new feature, we have the ideas portal where you can be logging that and asking for do we implement that. And that's fine again as a process. If on the other hand, this is a feature you have to have and you even go implement, then you may end up with an implementation that you'd rather actually have that it becomes part of the standard, and you're not really looking to hold on to that intellectual property of that code. You'd rather just have it become part of the standard directly. And so in this case, you could actually utilize the CDE program to submit code for that feature. And if it's truly a feature that makes good sense from the common group of organizations using the product as a standard feature, then we'd certainly be considering including that feature into the standard application. And the upside being then obviously, then you don't need to consider maintaining that code anymore. In fact, as you're implementing baseline of a feature, we would be able to evolve on that feature over time to make it even more rich than what you have initially provided. So then turning to how you go through the sign up for the program. Developers that wants to onboard this needs to go through a sign up process. There's a sign up process or form available that can be accessed using this URL. And let me just open that so you can get a visual to how it looks. It is a quite lengthy type of form that will open where there's a lot of information. you can surely imagine that when you are submitting code to Microsoft, it becomes available for everyone. And so if you would have reservations for sharing that code or handing over that code, like if you consider this a part of your intellectual property in any way, then of course you cannot be submitting the code. And in this particular agreement that you are onboarding, signing up to, there's actually clauses at which that you are waiving the right to the intellectual property. There's a good number of information that you are looking at here that you're accepting to terms. As individual engineers are signing up, there's also, you provide some contact information, obviously. You will also be specifying a C-level role within your organization. And this is because we will be notifying that C-level manager that you have been onboarding the system, so that they are aware that within the organization that you are using this program accordingly. So you go through the sign-up process, specifying this information on this form. What happens next is that we would be reviewing your application at Microsoft. We would obviously be reviewing to see if the identity of the developer that's been signing up seems reasonable, like that it's a known partner or customer running the application is commonly something that we will be assessing. Once we have gone through that and we have agreed to that, yes, we want to provide access, then there's a couple of resources that are going to be granted access to for becoming enrolled in the CDE program. First of all, we are granting access to a DevOps project where there's a CDE project where requests are maintained. And this is available on the URL that you see here. We'll get back to showcasing how you're interacting with this later on. We will also be granting access to a public-facing Git repository. This Git repository is essentially the application and the application code, and you would find that there would be a range of different branches. In fact, every build that we are going out with under one version and going forward that becomes available for the market, even preview builds, will be made available in this Git repository. And what it means is that when you're doing development, you would be able to interact with the build that match up with the build that you are having on your development machine, because essentially all of the builds are available in this Git repository. And you'd use this Git repository to interact with the application. You'll be syncing down if there's changes done by others in the community, interacting through the community-driven engineering. You would be able to see changes that they are doing. The upside in that would be that it enables that you can actually have a couple of engineers or group of engineers collaborating on a particular initiative, and you would be able to collaborate on the same code towards that you are bringing that proposal submitted to us. And certainly by the end of your request, you'll be making pull requests, which is a way of pushing the changes back to us for our review. Now I spoke about the community aspect of this, that more can be collaborating, and a part of this is also that we are granting access to a Yammer group, a community within that you can be discussing certain initiatives, and you could be teaming up with others. We in fact hoped for that this would lead to some kind of community where maybe you are looking at some kind of change, but you don't really see that you will be jumping at this. But who knows, if a couple of other engineers would find good value in doing that, then maybe, jointly you are able to drive that forward. And so this community allows for communicating with others that are using the program it's also a vehicle or a model for which that you can ask questions, and we'll sit to provide feedback on that to guide you as well. So how is the process actually flowing? I mentioned that you are granted access to an Azure DevOps project, CDE project. And in that, we are enabling that you can create box or features. Box is also used for extensibility requests. And when you are working with these, you see that these work items go through a state transition. And initially, when you create a request, it would have a state of new. You'd go prepare and add the information on the request, and then you'll actually send it off for our review. And this is even before you start doing any code. Why are we having that loop with us before you start coding? Well, that's because when you propose something, we may actually already be aware of this and have work in progress on this, or we may say, well, you can't change that because then you'd violate, say, another variant, another scenario. So we can't take that approach. So providing you this type of early feedback helps ensure that you're not spending time on trying to follow through of making a change where at the end of it, we would need to say no to take that in. So that early feedback is what we are having there. So as you are sending it on, you creating it, you'll set it to state in review, and we will sit at the back end and reviewing that. And if we are good with this, we'll then change the state to active, which means that now it's ready for you to start working on preparing your code. And ultimately, when you're ready with that, creating a pull request, and you then again change the state to pull requested to indicate the progression of the work. We will be sitting at the back end of that to assess what kind of change you have been doing, and there we'll be kicking off a code review process where we will look at the code that you have proposed. Can we take it as is, or are there some changes that we would need to see happen before that it can meet our, you could say, engineering bar, or for going into the standard application code. So sometimes it leads to that you need to be doing a few additional tweaks before it's good to go. So by the end of this review, we will be able to say we approve the pull request, which indicates to you that, okay, Microsoft has accepted the change as we have come to terms with in the review, code review. And as of that point of time, we will, at the back end of this, take the code package that was prepared. We'll do integrating into our main branches that we will be subsequently releasing from, and it will start then going out in the next updates available after that. So this is kind of the process that it would follow with everything going as it commonly would. It's possible, though, that during the review, the early review, that we'll end up having to reject the request, like if we're saying we can't follow through with making this change into the application for varying reasons. So that's a way by which a flow here, a request can end out. You may also, as an engineer, be looking at a request where you're saying, okay, I actually don't want to complete this. I for whatever reason, want to abandon this. And so there's even a state by which that you can put it in that state and stop further processing on this. When you're creating these requests, there's some information you need to help ensure that is provided. The work items in the Azure DevOps is for the work item box. Here we're asking for, do provide some repro steps. Give us a good idea on the steps that needs to be going through in order for the issue to manifest. If you're using the type box for extensibility request, then the repro steps are not so important. Then it's more important that you specify information on what you're trying to achieve with your customization instead. There's a field for area. Feel free to specify the most relevant one there. You'd be working on filling in the information on the work item here. And once you're ready with that, flip the state to in review. That signals that it's getting handed over to us at Microsoft, and we'll start looking at what you have filed. And then at that time, as I mentioned before, we are going to assess if we accept it and you can proceed with fixing, or if for whatever reason we need to reject it. And it will at that point of time be assigned back to the engineer that opened this. This is how it looks in DevOps, and we'll actually revisit this as we go through the scenario. So I'll not spend more time on this. For features, the information is somewhat similar to that of Box, but there's some information that needs to be called out more. And that is, if you are proposing or handing over some feature that are obviously changing some functionality, if that feature is adding some changes into the user interface, you need to be calling them out explicitly. This is important because, you know, under one version, we have feature management where we need to empower customers to control when a new capability is added. And so we need to be making sure that changes in the process like that is considered if it needs to be governed by feature management. And again, if it is, we will go through the process with you and ensuring that becomes part of it by having some iterations with you to make that happen. Similar, if you have data model changes, that's also pretty key, because changes to the data model needs to be considered, because we are moving towards that upgrade can happen with zero downtime or virtually zero downtime. And so the patterns for how that we can update data is governed to some extent. And so that's something there also to consider, how those updates are needing to happen. And so also there can be a little bit of learning involved in the interaction as we settle on how to do that. Same thing for the feature work item. Once you're done with this, set it to in review and it will process similar to the box. And feature looks quite similar to the box on the DevOps project. Changing gear then to how would you be able to make your environment ready for using the CDE and make your changes that connect up with the Git repository that is made available. To go through the process, first of all, you can take a development environment, irrespective of if it's Azure hosted or if it's an environment that you have as a downloadable type VM, and go prime that. You need to be loading Git and installing on the machine, and there's a link to how you are locating the binaries for that. As you go through the installation visits, you can mostly just take the standard steps as you go through. There's a couple of steps where we commonly are making changes that I've highlighted with the screens below, and so you can consider similar. Setting up the development environment, there's a couple of steps you need to do. The first steps that you see under bullet A is that it will clone down the Git repo files. And once you have done that, you are able to execute or you need to configure your username and email with the commands in bullet B. And finally, you execute a set of commands for mounting the repository into your development machine. Essentially what it is that on the development machine, we will ensure that standard models that are part of the CDE program will now be connected up with the Git repository. In effect, what will happen is that when you're working within Visual Studio, everything will seem as if that it was as is, but behind the scenes we have some links that ensure that it gets connected up to the Git repository files. The last part you need to do in order to prime your development environment before you can get going is that you need to be building all the standard models that are part of the CDE program. And you can use the build models and then selecting these models that are currently the ones that we are supporting under the CDE program. That all in all shouldn't take you more than approximately an hour to do, and then you're good to go. So with that, I would like to turn into doing a demo so you can get a sense of what are really the steps and flows that we will be going through. You'll be going through as you are working with a request. So I will be going through the process all from initially that we'll create a bug request in the DevOps CDE project. We will be creating a dedicated branch for you to drive your changes through. And we'll make the changes in Visual Studio. You would then be pushing the changes back and creating a pull request, which puts the change in view for us at Microsoft. And we'll then have the review going between us up until the point where we can approve and complete the request. So with that, I will jump into my development environment here. And the first step we would be doing is creating a new bug. I have for convenience a link available here. So I have then connected here to the Azure DevOps CDE project. The URL was in the slides before, and on the action for creating a new bug. And so obviously here you need to specify the information that is required for communicating what the change is all about. Rather than you see me spending time on typing this in, I actually have a tab here at which that I have prepared information. And in this example here, we're going to be looking at a change where we are making an extensibility request through the CDE. We are having a need for being able to extend on a sales packing slip data provider initialization. And we cannot do that as the code's constructed right now. One of the common patterns we have for extensibility to enable such a scenario is that we use an extract method. And assuming here that the engineer is familiar to how we are commonly doing that, a request is then put forward for extracting out a method. And this was follow the established patterns we have, so it's good and fine to go. So with that, I would actually save the requests. And remember, I mentioned earlier that we need to make sure state is flipped to in review, which indicates that the request is now being reviewed at the back end at Microsoft, where we will be assessing if the request is good to go implement or if there's any type of concerns with this. And I hope that Laurent is sitting in the back end of this and paying attention to that a new request has ticked in with us, and we'll get some feedback to this. So I'll just refresh, and it is in review with Laurent right now. So he's looking at it, he's assessing to see if the change here is good to make. And again, this is where we consider if we can make this change, if the change is one that compromises what we can bring into the standard application. you know, for instance, also that with the one version where we're doing updates on a regular basis, that's something we have become paying very much attention to now, is that we ensure that we are not breaking compatibility with existing solutions that are out there. And so we have a fair amount of due diligence in making sure we are making changes that doesn't violate that. But this looks good. I see Laurent has provided a comment that it seems good and accepted, and we're able to proceed with making the changes for this. So that's great. That means that now we can actually proceed in doing work here. For the following steps that I'm going through, I have actually a little helper notepad running, and this is to avoid that I'm doing a lot of typing and you're not seeing me spend time on that. What you're needing to do is obviously have a command prompt available. Make sure you're running this as admin, because some of the access that you need to be having for using these Git commands require the admin access. Now that we have been put into a state where we are able to make the change, we can start processing of that. The first thing we need to do is we need to go create our own branch. And the first thing we need to make sure is obviously that we are in the right directory, where the Git repository has been mounted onto. And normally, if you've just gone through the steps, you would have that your environment has already the builds that you have deployed locally made the active one. But in the event that you might have been doing something else, it's good practice to actually make sure that you indicate that you do a checkout on the build that match what you have deployed on your environment. Next, we will be creating a new sub-branch, and I need to make sure this was 68 that was created as expected. Good practice here is when you make a sub-branch, use your own credentials as first. Mine at Microsoft is FDAHL, and then a slash, and then use the ID on the bug or the feature ID that you have been created. That keeps it more seamless to pair up between the work items and the branches that are made. So with this, I have now made a new branch, and I need also, sorry about that, I need also to ensure that that particular branch is the one that is going to be used as origin also. So all of that done. Now actually I have made sure that the current branch that I will be working on from a Git perspective is my local branch that I have made dedicated for this work item. And so all of that is done, and the next step I'll go through is actually making the change in Visual Studio. I have my Visual Studio available here, and I'll be making changes to the sales packing slip journal post class. And so what I simply can do is add this to a new project that I'll make. And notice this is the application suite model directly we are working with, and that's fine. That is something we can do now with this enablement of the development environment. So I'm now working directly in the code as if I was basically doing the development directly at Microsoft. So what I'm looking at in the request is I want to make sure that this sales packing slip data provider becomes available for my extensions. And for that, I'd want to make a new method that is an extract method. So I'll add that here. And I'll make sure I'm calling that instead of the instantiation of the data provider. I'll substitute that. Like that. So essentially, this call is now isolated in a method, and the thing that this enables is that this method is a protected one, meaning we can use chain of command on this, and then it allows for doing an extension on this scope to build a customization like that. So with that, I'll actually be building the solution. And now, commonly, you'd also be testing out to see that it still works. We'll assume for this that this is something that has been done already, and not going through that right now. And it only takes a few minutes. And build completed. So with that, we have done compile. We can actually, if we look at our command prompt here, if I do a git status here, we can actually see that this particular file was modified. So this is a way by which you can see that we made a change from within Visual Studio, how it is actually connected up to this local Git repository mirror of files that we have locally under this Git CD directory structure. And so this means that they're able to be added and pushed. So first, adding files, the last command, the capital A is for all files as a convenience. We need to, when we're committing something, to specify a comment. And rather than typing, I'll just copy that. And then finally, pushing the changes. So now what we have done, we have basically our local branch, and now we have added in the changes there and said they're pushed into that depot. And now we are able to make a so-called pull request to bring that back in. So what I'll do is I will go back here to my bug. I will be adding a link to that, because I will be linking to the branch that I'm using. Actually, I'll take mine. 68 was the one the bug that I'm having, and I've used in that I've had similar naming on the branches. So I'll pick that branch for the bug. I'll just need to save. Then what I'll do is I'll create a pull request. And this pull request will then automatically identify the branch that I have prepared the changes on. But what I need to specify is the branch that the changes are going into. Right now, I'm making changes to the recent builds that came out for 10.06, and so that's what I have on my environment. And it links to the bug that I'm having. So with that, I will go and create. You see the bug is work item is selected down here. Create the pull request. And now it's waiting for review at Microsoft again. We're able to see that there's files that were involved in this particular pull request, and I'm also able to see that I've made a commitment, a file commit a couple of minutes ago, and this way that I'm able to actually follow on what's happening. What I need to do also is that this particular request here, now I have made the pull request, but I need to do one more thing. I need to go back to the work item, and I need to indicate that now I have actually sent it off. I have done all the work I need to do, and it is to be considered pull requested. Again, now I'm hoping for then that Microsoft is sitting at the back end, paying attention to that here's a change that has come in that I'd like to see implemented as I have been proposing it with these code changes. And the processing here can take a little longer. It's not instantaneous. You can imagine that here you're actually looking at specific code changes and you'd need to be assessing, is this good? Are there concerns? Maybe they will even need to sandbox some of the changes to validate to see if it doesn't break anything. Changes like that can take a few days before we're able to process this. But for the sake of this example here, I'm pretty sure that we'll have a feedback coming quite soon. So what I'll do is that I will actually navigate back to the pull request. And Gaurang has joined as reviewer, is what I can see. And he's indicating that he's waiting on the author. Well, this is because I see he's added a comment. So he wasn't content with what I did initially. I see that I have missed out adding XML documentation. Yeah, that's right, I forgot. Okay, so we are looking at another iteration for this work. In this case, I would need to go back and revisit the code that I have. I need to add then the XML documentation in on this new method that I've been making. And I have that here. Let me copy that in. There we go. And do the compile again and validate, obviously. You see, I made an error. Good. We have the compiler helping out here. Let's try that again. And it should only take a second or two. There we go. Now I can do a git status again to see where we're at. And sure enough, there's a new change that has come in for the file that I just edited. So we need to add that back, similar to what we did before, going through the changes of adding, committing, and pushing that back. Let's do that. And you see here in the change that we have changed one file, we have added 9 lines. Yes, that makes sense. It's the XML documentation we added in this iteration. So that's it. We have pushed, and so we have actually made the changes. We have put it back into the depot. What I need to do then is that I need to go revisit the pull requests, because under the files, I'm able to see the changes that Laurent, or the comments Laurent made, and say, and I can then provide feedback to him. And make the changes first, obviously, and push them into the depot. It's only then it becomes visible. And once you're then done, you can here in the review say, okay, reply and resolve the request. And basically what this does is that I provide feedback to Microsoft that the change has now been amended as requested, and the pull request is now in effect taking another iteration now. And this is all connected up, by the way, to emails that are exchanged. So in fact, we will be both receiving emails that a new change was done at the end of Microsoft, and similar, if a comment like the one that Laurent did earlier on the pull request, you would actually see an email as the one that you have been locking the request or making the pull request to get notified in this way. I would also be getting information on that any updates on this as it happens, and I assume that Laurent is working on this right now to review that the documentation part is also fine, and hopefully we are good to go with that. Let me do a refresh on this. And last comment here is Laurent has approved the change, and you see actually in the policies here also that now all the due diligence around this has been met. Everything is okay, and Laurent has approved it. So that means that we can basically complete the pull request. You see it's assigned back to me. I've been notified that the change has been made and everything is good to go. And so I'm able to complete the request to close things off. So by clicking complete, you see information that's here, which is basically indicating just that go ahead and complete the merge. Everything is fine. And that ends then the process for US developers that has been making a request. We will, in some instances, if the complete state is not done by the engineers, do it on your behalf, so that we avoid that requests are hanging too long. Yeah, and so basically when you click complete, that's it. The next stages that will happen is that we at Microsoft, if you recall, in the end of the process, will be taking this package and integrating into our main depots, and then processing it outwards towards release. And that concludes the demo. So I will just go back to the presentation. One thing I'll say is that the steps that we went through, both on the setup of your environments, but also the steps for actually creating a pull request, pushing changes, and those bits are all documented on the main page of the DevOps. So by using this link, you'd actually get to a page where you see this information called out as well. So revisit that, because that will give you this information also. The last part I'll mention is I said that you would be granted access to a Yammer group specific for community-driven engineering. Again, if you're left with any questions, uncertainties, or want to discuss something with others that are part of the community, do use then this community that's made for that particular purpose. And so hopefully, all in all, you have had a good now holistic insight to what the community-driven engineering is all about, and see that there are instances where you could be driving changes where the CDE is a good alternative to using the traditional channels, and hopefully you'll then consider that moving forward. That was what I had planned, and I would open up for additional questions if we have any. Laurent, are there any questions that you think is worthwhile that we call out in public that we should take?
There's been quite a few questions. Some of them about what is part of the community-driven engineering in terms of model. So you have shown the list of model, and based on demand, we may extend that to some more if there is a good demand. So if you are interested in having more models being exposed, we could discuss that on Yammer, and we'll see what we can expose. Still, we are not considering exposing the low-level platform code on that, only the X++ part of finance and operation.
Correct.
There's been some question about the right, and what if I want to contribute but my employer disagree? Then that's a discussion that will have to be taken with your company directly. It's not for us. In principle, you may be able to share your own code, but not the one from your company. But I mean, making a distinction between the two is usually pretty difficult. So you need to be clear and discuss that within your own company.
It is, and good practice certainly is, if in doubt, clear it internally before submitting code. That's what you should be doing.
There was some question about the response time. I think it will be in general, we try to be responsive as much as possible. We may have to reach to other teams as well, depending on the area you are considering changing. So that may take some time. So usually you get between a few days and a week, or a bit more than a week, before you get the answer on your request.
Yeah, and on that, we're not going out with a specific delay on this. The thing is, the nature of changes vary quite a bit, and we also don't know what kind of feedback would be needed, how many iterations we'd need to be taking before we can settle on a change. So it's hard to predict. But do think along the lines of that we are quickly getting to the state where we're looking at specific code. Compare this to if you're filing a service request where the repro and all of that needed to be established first, and an understanding of what is really the issue. We are so much faster in getting to a state where we're talking about the specifics of the code. And so just from that, we expect to see that we can have quicker turnaround on changes going through the CDE compared to some of the other established channels we have.
Yep.
Was those the main questions you had?
That was the main question I had, yes. And the final one, there was a question about is there any retribution for the work? No, that's not the case, but we'll find a way to recognize the main contributor in some way. So we'll brainstorm that and come up with a way to say a big thank you to people that contribute to this project.
Right. I don't know if there's any more questions ticking in we should take now. If not, then I'll hand it back to you, Janice. And thank you all for attending.
All right, thank you, Frank. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a brief moment here and bring your attention to a link that I posted in the Q&A panel. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference. We ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference, have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, or you'd like to submit topics for future web conferences, this is your chance to let us know. We do appreciate the time you take to do this, and thank you for your support. And that is going to conclude today's web conference. The recording and a copy of the presentation deck will be made available within 5 business days. Please look for an email in the coming days that will include details on how to access them. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, Frank and Laurent, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.